Showtime!
Won't tell you about crime. The black left won't tell you about crime. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lord Gord Podcast. Here we're giving you information that's factually correct and politically incorrect. And if you can't take the heat, stay out of the kitchen, baby! And honey, if you're in the kitchen, make me a sandwich, will ya? So last week we touched on illegitimacy, its direct correlation with poverty and criminality, and I promised you a sensational topic this week. Who remembers? What could it be? This week we're talking about black crime, we're talking about black criminality, we're talking about how it's wildly out of proportion. We're going to talk about the consequences of black crime from a health standpoint, from an economic standpoint. We're going to talk about the purveyors of ideologies that encourage black crime, that make it less safe for blacks, less safe for cops, less safe for people in general, and makes communities less economically viable because of this crime problem. So, are you ready? Are you ready? Because I'm ready. Are you ready? Okay, let's dive into this. This is a current analysis of violent crime by race. Here we go. Blacks make up 12% of the U.S. population, but from 1976 to 2005, blacks committed over 52% of the murders in the country. That's a lot of murders for a small population. That's a majority of murders by a minority population. For those that are following, in 2006, they constituted 39.3% of all violent crime arrests, including 56% of all robberies and 34.5% of all aggravated assaults and 29% of all property crime arrests. The arrest data in subsequent years remains the same. So now we're going to go on a journey. We're going to take a trip through the rabbit hole of black criminality. Oh, and it gets ugly. It gets dirty. And it gets nasty. Let's talk about Chicago. Here's the 2017 shooting numbers for Chicago. There were 2,785 people shot and wounded. There were 650 people who were shot dead. Police-involved shootings for Chicago in 2017, 11 killed and 12 wounded. So much for that narrative that's been debunked over and over again, that police are just killing people for no apparent reason whatsoever, just going around like Rambo or the Punisher, just killing innocent people. Anyway, the last murder report from the Chicago Police Department in 2011 shows that 75% of murder victims are black. If you care about black lives, there's your number right there. 75% of murder victims are black. It's not the police killing them. I wonder who's killing all these black people. Just wonder. It's not the police. I wonder if it's the Chinese. You wonder if it's the Chinese? Let's keep going. From 1991 to 2011, there have been 13,611 murders in Chicago, and 74% of the victims have been black. Okay? From 1991 to 2011, there were 12,174 murderers, and 76% of them were black. So this black crime rate in Chicago, this murder rate, sounds like a black problem to me. I don't know about you, but it sounds like a black problem to me. All right. Out of all the murderers, 78% had prior criminal records. 78%. That means these criminals are just roaming the streets, not being punished for their behavior, and they went on to kill people. So much for criminal justice reform. We'll touch on that a little bit later. Here are the most dangerous cities according to the FBI. The 10 most dangerous cities. We'll see if you can spot a trend with these cities, okay? Here we go, baby. Oh, baby. Number 1, Detroit. 2,137 violent crimes per 100,000. The 2010 census indicates that 82% of the population was black. The 2012 homicide numbers show that 88.9% of the murder victims were black. Ugh. I couldn't find the perp numbers, but I don't think it was the Chinese or the Hispanics or the whites or the police killing all these black people. That's just me. I mean, I tried to comb through so much data, it would show that most killings are done by acquaintances. Oh. But they never talk about the gender or the race of these acquaintances. There's euphemisms that hide this overarching evidence that suggests that all these crimes are a black problem. Let's keep going. 100% Democrat mayors in Detroit since 1962. Let me say that again. Detroit has had 100% Democrat mayor since 1962. Second most dangerous city in the country is St. Louis, Missouri. Good old STL. 1,857 violent crimes per 100,000. The 2016 census indicates that 47% of the population was black. Out of the 203 murders in St. Louis in 2017, 93.6% of the murder victims were black. Out of the 165 murderers in St. Louis for 2017, 81% were black. Oof. It's a black problem. This murder is a black problem in St. Louis. It's a problem in Detroit. It's a problem in Chicago. Let's keep going. St. Louis has had 100% Democrat mayor since 1949. Let's go to the third city. Third most dangerous city in the United States of America. Have you heard? Oakland, California, with the dubious record of 1,683 violent crimes per 100,000. The 2014 census indicates that 28% of the Oakland population is black, and blacks make up 83% of murder suspects and 74% of murder victims in Oakland. Also, here's a little nugget for ya. Oakland has had 100% Democrat mayor since 1977. 100%. Oh man, listeners, I think I'm noticing a trend. I think I'm noticing some trend. What could it be? Are you noticing a trend? Because I'm noticing a trend. I don't know what could it be. Is it police murders? Is it Asian on Asian violence? No. Is it white on white violence? No. So let's keep going. Fourth most dangerous city in the United States of America. Memphis. 1,583 violent crimes per 100,000. 2008 census indicates that 62.6% of the population is black. In 2017, 71% of the homicide victims in Memphis were black. It was almost impossible to find out the race and gender of the perpetrators, and I combed through a lot of data, couldn't find it. I wonder why they're hiding it. I wonder. Memphis has also had 100% Democrat mayor since 1893. I think I'm noticing a trend in these big violent cities. Fifth most dangerous city in the United States of America, Birmingham, Alabama, has 1,483 violent crimes per 100,000. 2010 census indicates that 73.4% of the population is black. 117 homicides in 2017, and the city has been 88% Democrat mayor representation since 1967. Sixth most dangerous city in the United States of America, Atlanta, GA. 1,433 violent crimes per 100,000. The 2010 census indicates that it's 54% black. In Atlanta, blacks are 54% of the population, but are responsible for 100% of the homicides, 95% of the rapes, 94% of the robberies, 84% of aggravated assaults, and 93% of the burglaries. That was from the Atlanta PD, but for some strange reason, I wonder why, their website was taken down. So I had to get that from another source that sourced it previously. But I wonder why the Atlanta Police Department is trying to hide those numbers. I wonder why the government representation for the city of Atlanta is trying to hide those numbers. I wonder why. And Atlanta has been under 100% Democratic mayorship since 1879. Me thinks I've noticed a trend with these violent cities. Like peanut butter and jelly. They're two things that go hand in hand. And once those two things are joined hand in hand, you find a lot of crime and a lot of dysfunction, a lot of criminality, a lot of illegitimacy. But I wonder what these two things are. Seventh most dangerous city in the United States of America, Baltimore, Maryland. 1,417 violent crimes per 100,000. The 2010 census indicates that the city is 63% black. There were 343 homicides in 2017, a record number, and 84% of the victims were black. 84% of that 343 murdered in Baltimore were black. I couldn't find the race and gender of the perpetrators, but going through all this evidence that I've already gone through and what I'll continue to go through, I don't think it's a big surprise as to who's murdering all these black people in Baltimore. I mean, it could be Martians, could be Chinese, could be Japanese, could be Indians, could be whites, could be Hispanics. Who could it be? All right, Baltimore has had 100% Democrat mayorship since 1967. Oh, so great. Eighth most dangerous city in America, Stockton, California. 1,408 violent crimes per 100,000. 2010 census indicates that it has a 12% black population. I mean, it was so hard to find those murder numbers. I couldn't even find them. I mean, it takes so much digging. I mean, this black criminality is so hidden. It's so well hidden in plain sight. You go through all these media websites and they report on this crime. The crime happens in the low-income neighborhoods. Yeah, that's code word for the black neighborhoods. They should just come out and say it. It's the black neighborhoods where all this crime is happening, but they dare not say it. They dare not mention its name. The ninth most dangerous city in the United States of America is Cleveland, Ohio. Ohio! 1,336 violent crimes per 100,000 there. The 2010 census indicates that the city is about 53% black. 63.8% of the 2009 Ohio murder arrests were black. And Cleveland has had 75% Democratic mayorship since 1962. And the 10th most dangerous city in the United States of America is Buffalo, New York, with 1,238 violent crimes per 100,000. The 2010 census indicates that the city is about 39% black. And the murder clearance rate in 2016 was 19.5%. That means about 80% of the murders go unsolved. That means about 80% of these murderers are still walking around the street, sharing their peace and love and flowers and chocolates. And Buffalo has had 100% Democratic mayorship since 1966. The proof's in the pudding, folks. When you put blacks and Democrats together for a long time, you get dysfunction, you get crime, you get illegitimacy, you get terribly run schools, you get terrible students, so on and so forth. Yeah, welfare state. Such a good idea to give people stuff for moral and intellectual failure. It's so great to subsidize that and apologize for criminality and a counterproductive culture. What a great idea. What a way to start and have a society flounder and flourish. I don't know. All right, so we're going to talk about myths and excuses about black crime. Number one myth. Black crime is a legacy of slavery. These leftists love to bring slavery in any debate. Anytime you bring up black failure and black dysfunction, oh, slavery is the cause of it. Oh, slavery, white racism, that's the cause. Oh. But they completely abdicate the hundreds of years from slavery to where we are. They completely miss all of the happenings and the data and the evidence between those hundreds of years, and they don't measure the rates between those years, but that's what we're going to do. So, black crime rates, here's my rebuttal. Black crime rates rose 139% during the 60s. The crimes reached their zenith not in the Jim Crow South, but in the civilized North. Crime rose tremendously in the 70s and the 80s in these ghettos. And I'm going to read a quote from my man Jason Riley, okay? The title is Family Secret, What the Left Won't Tell You About Black Crime. This is an excerpt from Jason Riley's 2014 book called Please Stop Helping Us. Let me read this, okay? In the summer of 2013, after neighborhood watchman George Zimmerman, a Hispanic, was acquitted in the shooting death of Trayvon Martin, an unarmed black teenager, the political left wanted to have a discussion about everything except the black crime rates that lead people to view young black males with suspicion, including yours truly. President Obama and Attorney General Eric Holder, those purveyors of racial grievance, wanted to talk about gun control. The NAACP wanted to talk about racial profiling. Associated academics and MSNBC talking heads wanted to discuss poverty, stand your ground laws, unemployment, and the supposedly racist criminal justice system. But any candid debate on race and criminality in the United States must begin with the fact that blacks are responsible for an astoundingly disproportionate number of crimes, which has been the case for at least the past half a century. Crime began rising precipitously in the 1960s after the Supreme Court, under Chief Justice Earl Warren, started tilting the scales in favor of the criminals. Yeah, because when you give entitlements to criminals, they only commit less crimes. Didn't you know that? Some 63% of respondents to a Gallup poll taken in 1968 judged the Warren Court, in place from 1953 to 1969, too lenient on crime. But Warren's jurisprudence was supported wholeheartedly by the leftist intellectuals of that era, as well as by politicians who wanted to shift blame for criminal behavior away from criminals. Kind of like what they do now. Popular books of the time, like Carl Menninger's The Crime of Punishment, argued that Law and Order was an inflammatory tone with racial overtones. Yeah, because, when you actually enforce the law in black neighborhoods where there's crime, you arrest black criminals. That's racist. It's racist to arrest black criminals. Didn't you know that? What it really means, said Menninger, is that we should go all out and find the N-words and beat them up. We should find the N-words and beat them up. But we shouldn't care about the N-words who's beating up other N-words. Huh? We shouldn't care about the N-words that are torpedoing the economic growth and value in these communities. No, we shouldn't care about that. We should only care about the fact that arresting these so-called N-words is racial profiling. Good God. Let's keep reading. The late William Stuntz, a Harvard law professor, addressed this history in his 2011 book, The Collapse of American Criminal Justice. The lenient turn of the mid-20th century was, in part, the product of judges, prosecutors, and politicians who saw criminal punishment as too harsh a remedy for ghetto violence, wrote Mr. Stuntz. The Supreme Court's expansion of criminal defendants' legal rights in the 1960s and after flowed from the justices' perception that poor and black defendants were being victimized by a system run by white government officials. Even the rise of harsh drug laws was in large measure a product of reformers' efforts to limit the awful costs illegal drug markets impose on poor city neighborhoods. Each of these changes flowed, in large measure, from the decisions of men who saw themselves as reformers, but their reforms showed an uncanny ability to take bad situations and make them worse. Crime rates rose by 139% during the 1960s, and the murder rate doubled. Cities couldn't hire cops fast enough. The number of police per 1,000 people was up twice the rate of the population growth, and yet clearance rates for crimes dropped 31%, and conviction rates were down 6%, wrote Lucas A. Poe Jr. in The Warren Court in American Politics, His History of the Warren Court. During the last weeks of his 1968 presidential campaign, Nixon had a favorite line in his standard speech. In the past 45 minutes, this is what happened in America. There has been 1 murder, 2 rapes, 45 major crimes of violence, countless robberies, and auto thefts. Yeah, but actually catching these criminals causes more of these crimes. Didn't you know? As remains the case today, blacks in the past were overrepresented among those arrested and imprisoned. In urban areas in 1967, blacks were 17 times more likely than whites to be arrested for robbery. In 1980, blacks comprised about 1/8 of the population, but were half of all those arrested for murder, rape, and robbery, according to the FBI data. And they were between 1/4 and 1/3 of all those arrested for crimes such as burglary, auto theft, and aggravated assault. Today, blacks are about 13% of the population and continue to be responsible for an inordinate amount of crime. Between 1976 and 2005, blacks committed more than half of all murders in the United States. The black arrest rate for most offenses, including robbery, aggravated assault, and property crimes, is still typically 2 to 3 times their representation in the population. Blacks as a group are also overrepresented among persons arrested for so-called white-collar crimes such as counterfeiting, fraud, and embezzlement. And blaming this decades-long, well-documented trend on racist cops, prosecutors, judges, sentencing guidelines, and drug laws doesn't cut it as a plausible explanation. AKA, blaming everyone else but black people for their own behavior does not cut it. Even allowing for the existence of discrimination in the criminal justice system, the higher rates of crime among black Americans cannot be denied, wrote James Q. Wilson and Richard Herrnstein in their classic 1985 study, Crime and Human Nature. Every study of crime using official data shows blacks to be overrepresented among persons arrested, convicted, and imprisoned for street crimes. This was true decades before the authors put it to paper, and it remains the case decades later. The overrepresentation of blacks among arrested persons persists throughout the criminal justice system, wrote Wilson and Herrnstein. Though prosecutors and judges may well make discriminatory judgments, such decisions do not account for more than a small fraction of the overrepresentation of blacks in prison. Yet liberal policymakers, I call them leftist policymakers, they're not true liberals, and their allies in the press and the academy consistently downplay the empirical data of black crime rates when they bother to discuss them at all. Stories about racial makeup of prisons are commonplace. Stories about the excessive amount of black criminality are much harder to come by. High rates of black violence in the late 20th century are a matter of historical fact, not bigoted imagination, wrote Mr. Stuntz. The trends reached their peak not in the land of Jim Crow, but in the more civilized North, and not in the age of segregation, but in the decades that saw the rise of civil rights for blacks and of black control of city governments. The left wants to blame these outcomes on racial animus and the system, but blacks have long been part of running that system. Black crime and incarceration rates spiked in the 70s and 80s in cities such as Baltimore, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and Washington under black mayors and black police chiefs, who all happen to be Democrats for some strange reason. Some of the most violent cities in the United States today are run by blacks, like Baltimore, Stephanie Rawlings. Let's give them space to destroy, because they're upset. Let's not hold them to standards of civility. Let's not enforce the law. Let's let them destroy property and harm and maim and kill other human beings and cause areas to be economic disasters. Yeah, that was Stephanie Rawlings Blake, black person, saying we should give people a space to destroy. That's on video. Black people are not shooting each other at these alarming rates in Chicago and other urban areas because of our gun laws or our drug laws or a criminal justice system that has it in for them. The problem is primarily cultural. Self-destructive behaviors and attitudes all too common among the black underclass. The problem is black criminal behavior, which is one manifestation of the black pathology that ultimately stems from the breakdown of the black family and the subsidization of the family breakdown due to the leftist welfare state, which comes from our tax dollars. Leftists want to talk about what others should do for blacks instead of what blacks should do for themselves. Because blacks are just infants. They're helpless. They can't do anything without the help of white people. They can't rise themselves out of poverty. They can't learn anything. They can't correct their behaviors. It all has to be someone else's problem, not their own problem. Didn't you know? If we don't acknowledge the cultural barriers to black progress, how can we address them? How can you even begin to fix something that almost no one wants to talk about honestly? Kind of like if your car is leaking oil and you go to the auto mechanic and the auto mechanic says, hey, your car is leaking oil. And you're like, no, it's not oil, it's my transmission. You spend money to fix the transmission. The car is leaking more oil. The mechanic says, hey, your car is leaking even more oil. You said, oh, it's not the oil, it's my tires. You spend money on tires. The car is leaking even more oil. The car is in worse shape than before. The mechanic says, you know your car is leaking oil. You have an oil problem. No, it's not oil. It's my radiator in my coolant system. That needs to be refurbished. Spend a bunch of money on that. Now the car is barely running. It's trashed. You spend all this money on everything but what the problem was. You go back, the mechanic says, your problem is oil loss and oil leakage. You could have saved a lot of money by solving what the actual problem was, but instead, you put your head in the sand and you blamed it on everything else but what the actual problem was, and now you're in a worse position than before. Just like these black ghettos all across the country. All right. Myth number 2. Poverty causes crime. No, the reality is that crime causes poverty, okay? That point will be touched later on, but let's give you some stats about poverty. There are more poor whites in this country than poor blacks. They don't commit as many crimes. There are more poor Hispanics in this country than poor blacks, yet they don't commit as many crimes. You combine the number of poor blacks and poor Hispanics, and blacks commit more crime, more murders than those two demographics combined. 52% of the murders. Yet there are more poor whites than poor blacks. There are more poor Hispanics than poor blacks. You put the Hispanic murder rate and the white murder rate together, and it still does not come close to equaling the black murder rate. Dude. All right, let's bring up a quote from the great book, Thomas Sowell's Economic Facts and Fallacies. I forgot to mention this, but a lot of information I've been getting previously is from the great book, The Wong Cops, by Heather McDonald. It's a great book. She's a very erudite scholar, secular conservative, someone I admire very much, someone who digs into the data and is not scared to tell the truth about black criminality, about black crime, the effects of black crime, and how it hurts all of us, especially black people. So let's get a quote from Economic Facts and Fallacies about poverty and crime. For well over a century, the prevailing view behind much government policy has been that bad physical surroundings promote crime and other activities detrimental to society and to the individuals who engage in these activities. From this belief have followed massive and costly government programs to demolish slums or blighted areas and to relocate individuals from those areas into either newly built government housing projects or to scatter individuals and families from bad neighborhoods into good neighborhoods. Kind of like what they do when they move all the Section 8 people from Watts to Lancaster and Palmdale and Moreno Valley and San Bernardino, thinking if you move them to the suburbs, the crime will just magically disappear. But somehow, in some way, they just bring the bad behavior and the criminality with them. Everywhere they go, the crime follows them. So even though they're living in these much better neighborhoods that aren't deteriorated, so on and so forth, the crime rates go up as they increase their presence there. Who would have thought? All right, so there's a quote about an Italian-American slum, how people were going to school, they were rising out of poverty, different people were coming and going from these slums, so on and so forth. We're going to talk about one of the poorest neighborhoods in the 1960s. During the 1960s, one neighborhood in San Francisco had the lowest income, the highest unemployment rate, the highest proportion of families with incomes under $4,000 a year, the least educational attainment, the highest tuberculosis rate, and the highest proportion of substandard housing in any area of the city. That neighborhood was called Chinatown. Yet in 1965, there were only 5 people of Chinese ancestry committed to prisons in the entire state of California. But according to the leftist view that poverty causes crime, criminality should have been rampant in Chinatown. There should have been murders and homicides and robberies up the wazoo in this place. Yet it wasn't true. It was not true whatsoever. All right, so we can talk about Here it is. Time and time again, moving slum dwellers into brand new public housing projects has only created new centers of crime in those projects, with the new buildings rapidly deteriorating into new slums. Widely praised designs for projects, like the Pruitt-Igoe projects in St. Louis, have ended up such abject failures in practice that they have had to be dynamited. By 2002, Philadelphia had blown up 20 high-rise public housing projects. Chicago blew up 28 16-story buildings containing more than 4,000 apartments. They continue on still more schemes based on similar assumptions, such as housing vouchers to enable slum dwellers to go live in middle-class communities, and utter disregard of the years of sacrifice that the people in those middle-class communities may have made precisely in order to be able to afford to go live away from the hoodlums and criminals now being placed in their midst by government programs. Voucher tenants often do not pay their utility bills or their required 30% share of the rent in Prince George's County. In Riverdale, a school once boasting a top academic reputation has seen its achievement levels drop, refuting the idea that shipping poor families to good schools in the suburbs will cause an education ethic to rub off. It's not magic. It's behavior, dude. Kind of like when a lot of people got displaced in New Orleans from Hurricane Katrina to Houston. The transfer to Houston was followed by a sharp increase in Houston's crime rate, especially murder. Okay? All this goes to show that the evidence suggests that changing people's location does not change their behavior. The core problems are behavior. This culture that glorifies criminality and social deviance, it glorifies anti-intellectualism, and it has no concept of good family formation habits. So it doesn't matter where they live. As long as they bring the behavior with them, the crime will come with them. It's not that hard to understand. Okay? Myth number 3. Whites and blacks commit the same level of crime, but since there are more police in black neighborhoods, you'll catch more criminals. Which is absolutely ridiculous, because if that's the case, where are all the 911 calls of all this white crime? Where are all the victims of all this white crime? Where's the photographic evidence of all this white crime? Where's all the videographic evidence of all this white crime? Where are all the eyewitnesses of all this white crime? Okay? When it comes to interracial violence between whites and blacks, blacks commit 85% of the interracial violence between whites and blacks against whites. I'll say that again. 85% of the violence that's interracial between blacks and whites is black on white. Even though whites, there are many more whites in the country than blacks, probably a multiple of 5 times more whites in the country than blacks, okay? In 2013, blacks made up 42% of cop killers, while less than a quarter of people slain by police were black. If less than a quarter of people slain by the police were black, I wonder what the ethnic group of all those other people were if they weren't black. Okay? Blacks were charged with 62% of all robberies, 57% of all murders, and 45% of all assaults in the 75 largest U.S. counties in 2009, while only being 15% of that population. Dude. New York City's police department drove down crime tremendously in the 90s with a data-driven approach as to where crime was happening and used proactive policing to keep people safe, especially black people, from black criminals. Crime in New York City dropped 12% after Chief Bratton's first year in office and 18% the following year. Blacks are 23% of the New York City population, but commit 66% of all violent crimes and 75% of all shootings, according to victims and eyewitnesses. So who are these blacks shooting? Are they shooting Martians? Are they shooting some other alien life form? Are they shooting deer or oxen or rabbits? No, they're shooting other black people. So the fact that there are more cops in these neighborhoods where all these crimes are happening shows that they're committed to protecting the lives of black people and getting black criminals off the street. Numerous studies have also shown that black arrest rates are in line with the percentages of witness and victim testimony. So it's not like 50% of people being arrested for murder are black, yet only 10% of victims and eyewitnesses are saying that blacks did it. Okay? For these grand conspiracy narratives against blacks to exist, that means victims have to lie, Eyewitnesses have to lie. Videos have to lie. Photos have to lie. I mean, so many people have to lie. And the only lie is the fact that people are covering up black crime. The only lie is that black crime rates and white crime rates are the same. They're clearly not. Myth number 4, the new Jim Crow. This is the one where the police just go around like ghost riders in the sky and they just round up black people for no reason. They just round up all these blacks for drug crimes. That's why all these blacks are in jail, because of drugs. It feeds the prison industrial complex and yeah, these blacks are just completely innocent. There's not a bunch of crime in the black community. It's just a conspiracy to keep blacks off the street and to keep them in jail and make money off them. Here's the reality. In 1997, criminologists Bob Sampson and Janet Lorenstein found that large racial differences in criminal offending explain the difference in sentencing rates between whites and blacks. Translation: just like there's a predominant amount of blacks in the NBA because they're better than everyone else, there's a predominance of black criminals in jail because they commit more crimes than everyone else. Who would have thought? While people love to rail about drug laws, only about 5,000 blacks went to jail for dealing crack in 2006, a fraction of the 562,000 blacks in prison at the end of 2006. Meth punishments, which is a white drug, are identical to crack punishments. Also, black leaders were the ones who pushed for harsher drug penalties for crack, and the bill was supported by a majority of black congressmen and was initiated by Charles Rangel, a black man. Because, yeah, blacks don't want crackheads and drug dealers in their neighborhood causing crime, hurting children and other innocent people and torpedoing the economic value and growth of these communities. Who would have thought that black people don't want crackheads and criminals in their neighborhoods? Who would have thought that? The most expansive prison growth from 1980 to 1990, 36% of state prison growth, which houses 88% of the nation's prisoners, came from violent crime compared to 33% that came from drug crime. So I'll repeat that again. More growth came from violent crime than drug crime, for all you geniuses out there. Violent offenders accounted for 53% of the census increase from 1990 to 2000 and all of the increase from 1999 to 2004. If you removed drug prisoners from that equation, the percentage of black prisoners drops from 37.5% of the 1,274,600 state prisoners to just 37%. You heard that right. If you took all the drug offenders out from the black prison population, the black prison population only drops 0.5%. Geniuses. In 1979, drug offenders were 6.4% of the state prison population. In federal prisons, drug offenders went from 25% of the population in 1980 to 47.6% in 2006. What's forgotten is that only 12% of the nation's prisoners are in federal jail. Let me repeat this again. Most blacks are in jail for violent crimes, not drug crimes. These criminals are in jail because they hurt other people, predominantly other black people. They make the neighborhoods unsafe. They make the neighborhoods economically unviable. It's not police committing these crimes. It's other black people, okay? All right, myth number 5. Arresting people causes more crime. It's just like if you're a teacher and a kid's misbehaving, enforcing the rules of the classroom only causes more bad behavior. Having fire extinguishers in your building only causes more fires. So I'm going to read a passage from The War on Cops by Heather McDonald, right here. All right, on this nonsense that's purveyed by the leftist intelligentsia and the media overall. Okay, where is this? Where am I here? We're talking about arresting people causes more crime. All right. How many convicts were living with the mother or one of their mothers before the children were living upstate, blah, 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 blah. Further, if Fagan is right that keeping criminals out of prison and on the streets preserves a community's social capital, inner cities should have thrived during the 1960s and early 1970s when prison resources contracted sharply. In fact, New York's poorest neighborhoods, the subject of Fagan's analysis, turned around only in the 90s when the prison population reached its zenith. If business owners think twice about setting up shop in those communities, it's because they fear crime, not a high concentration of ex-convicts. Putting more criminals on probation rather than sending them to jail, which they deserve, would only increase law enforcement surveillance in high crime neighborhoods. Okay? In these ghettos, most people choose to avoid criminal life. Most people living in these ghettos are not criminals. It's only a small fraction of the population that's committing a majority of these crimes. But for all this popularity that blames the system instead of actual individuals engages in morally and intellectually reprehensible actions, it's not hard to find dissenters that believe that individuals are responsible for breaking the law. My position is not that hard, says public housing manager Matthew Kennedy. You don't have to do that crime. You don't have to do the crime, dude. You don't have to do the crime, man. If there are no consequences for bad behavior, you will get more bad behavior. When you take police out these neighborhoods like they did in Baltimore, the murder rates spike. When the stop and frisk rates decreased 80% in Chicago in 2016, the shootings and the crimes went up. When there is no enforcement of the law, crime goes up. Because according to these people, if you had a child just throwing and breaking things and you chose not to punish him, that would lead to less misbehavior on the part of that child. That makes no sense. But they try to apply that on a macro level and think that not enforcing the law and not holding people accountable for their own actions will reduce crime. It's political alchemy. That's literally what it is. It's nonsense. It's gobbledygook. It doesn't work. Period. All right. Let's talk about policies and political attitudes of the left that encourage criminality. Number one, like I just said, increased police presence causes crime. Actually, crime rates in New York went down with proactive policing. I just told you, stop and frisk. When that went down in Chicago, the crime went up. So on and so forth. Let's talk about Prop 97 in good old California. Some of us call it California. It's becoming unbearable for businesses with high tax rates. They're artificially driving up the labor rates. The entitlement programs just keep growing. It's creating a larger and larger underclass. I mean, this state's going to be a dump. I don't even know if I'm going to be living here for the rest of my life. But let's keep going. Prop 47 in California downgraded tons of felonies to misdemeanors, and the crime has spiked. Who would have predicted that? AB 109, which has gutted parole supervision, has led to more crime as well. GPS tampering by fugitive sex offenders rose 65% from October 2011 through 2012. As of autumn 2013, 57% of the 5,400 AB 109 felons had been arrested for new crimes. Criminal justice reform and restorative justice, which were tried in the 70s and the 80s, to no effect, are still being tried today. They're just called something different. You know, catch and release, which drove up crime rates in the 70s, is just called criminal justice reform. It's the same thing. We're not going to stop crime by arresting criminals. We're going to artificially lower the crime rates by not arresting criminals anymore. So by not punishing bad behavior, you'll get more of it. The crime goes up. People are less safe. Economic viability goes down. So on and so forth. According to the Heritage Foundation, $22 trillion from the taxpayers have been spent on more than 80 means-tested welfare programs since the war on poverty started in 1964. Which basically means that the more government spending that happened, the more the crime rates went up. Who would have thought? The more subsidies of bad behavior that you give, the more bad behavior you get in return. Who would have thought that? And let's talk about this nonsense like restorative justice, man. Restorative justice is basically this. Say you're in a school. If a kid's fighting in the class, instead of suspending him and reprimanding him for his behavior and allowing the other students to learn and using taxpayer dollars effectively, they take the students in the room, they don't punish them, they talk to them for a little bit, and they take them back to class. No consequences for bad behavior, and that leads to more violence. But on paper, the crime rates go down, the suspension rates go down. So when people look at it on the surface, it looks like they're doing the correct thing in these schools, but the violence is just out of control. The violence is out of control in Fresno, in St. Paul, in LA, literally everywhere these policies are implemented, not only in the past, but today. While the raw numbers goes down, the criminality and violence goes up. Okay? These policies, they sound good. They really do sound good. They make elites feel good and warm and cuddly inside. But the people who actually have to deal with the consequences of their policies are living in dire straits with more criminality, right? With more dysfunction, okay? With more waste of taxpayer dollars, all right? Criminal justice reform. All criminal justice reform means is that we're going to arrest less criminals, like in Baltimore. They're going to cut their arrest rates in half from 100,000 to 50,000. They didn't say that they're going to stop arresting criminals. They're just going to stop sending out as many cops and stop arresting people. So what happened to the crime rate? It went down artificially on paper, but there are more crimes. The murder rate in Baltimore went up, and now Baltimore city officials are saying, hey, we need more cops. The crime is out of control. But you and other Democratic leaders were the same people who said when you take crime out of these when you take cops out of these ghettos, for that matter, the crime rates go down. So which one is it? Okay, I was just passing Crenshaw and Exposition by the train, and I saw maybe 10, 15 cops on the beat, and I saluted them because I know that area. It's a high crime area. I know someone who got shanked on one of those trains. It's not a safe place to be. So I want as many cops there as possible to protect people who are willing to ride those trains. Because if people don't want to ride the trains, no one will spend money on the trains, and the public transportation will lose even more money than it does because, newsflash, most people want private transportation and spend their money there. But don't tell the leftist elites that. All right, so let's talk about economic consequences of violent crime. Let's talk about Detroit. Detroit had the worst of the 60s black riots, yet its black poverty rate was half the national average, its percentage of black homeowners was the largest in the country, and its unemployment rate was 3.4% lower than the national average for whites. Okay? It became an economic disaster after the riots because no one wants to invest money in a place where law and order is not upheld. No one wants to invest in a place where the costs are higher for doing business and there is no guarantee that you will be protected by law enforcement. Okay? Stores in ghetto neighborhoods face higher operating costs due to the higher rates of shoplifting, vandalism, and violence. These costs are reflected in merchandise losses, repair costs, insurance costs, and costs of preventative devices like iron gates and security guards. While ghetto stores have higher prices on average, their profits aren't higher. I live in South Central LA. Every time I go through the neighborhood, stores have to repaint the sides of their buildings 3 to 4 times a week. Is it because of cops? No. Is it because of white people? No. It's because of black and Hispanic people who vandalize other people's property. Okay, they tag on it. It's not theirs. They are breaking the law. But due to our whole criminal justice reform, how we don't want to arrest criminals for criminal conduct, we don't want to punish people for their bad behavior, we get more bad behavior, and the costs are passed down to our businesses, which are passed down to consumers because it costs more money to run businesses in high crime neighborhoods. And it looks so ugly too. When I drive through the city and I see all these businesses with different colors of paint on the side of their building because they're tagged and vandalized on an almost daily basis by criminals, miscreants, and vagabonds. Okay? While there are concerns about how much it costs to lock up criminals, the concern should be the cost of keeping criminals on the street. Because in the early 21st century in England, the financial cost of crime was about $60 billion compared to the prison cost of $3 billion. In the United States, it's estimated that it costs $10,000 a year less to keep a career criminal behind bars than having him at large. Because uncertainty, crime, and lack of law enforcement deter business investments. Countries like Russia, Nigeria, and Haiti, notorious for corruption, have lower levels of growth and lower levels of per capita income because the costs are extremely high to go into business, and there's no guarantee that your property rights in your business will be protected by law enforcement. So that leads to less business, less economic investment, less economic growth, and less jobs. So like I'm saying here, these are my implications right here. If you want to deter crime, you must deter single motherhood and the bad ideas prevalent in black ghettos. To change behavior, you must change incentives. Roll the welfare back and actually punish criminals for criminal behavior, and you will see this slowly but surely start to correct itself. When you start holding the people accountable for their own actions, usually they change their actions when they have no choice. When you have a choice on whether to do nothing and be a criminal and actually make something of your life, a lot of people choose to be criminals and miscreants and social deviants. To spur economic growth, law enforcement must be swift and effective. Perverted incentives must change, and a culture that celebrates criminality and social deviance must be deterred. So when we talk about riots, it really bothers me when riots are fetishized in the leftist media like the LA Times and the New York Times. They talk about black uprising to combat oppression. Yeah, this uprising, I mean, they're not only breaking the law in wide-scale numbers. They're not only acting like barbarians and uncivilized people. You know, we wouldn't, if it's a toddler who's mad at something and he's breaking property, we wouldn't just apologize for the toddler's behavior. We'd stop him. But when it comes to black people, of course, we're not going to hold them to the same standards of civility that we hold whites and East Asians and Hispanics. We're just going to let them destroy property. We're going to let them torpedo the economic value and growth of their communities. We're going to let them harm innocent human beings. We're going to let them steal and rob and assault and rape. And we're going to try to assign some virtue to it. It's absolutely disgusting. Okay? That's why businesses don't want to invest in high crime areas. I just explained that. And you want to fetishize riots? You want to fetishize violence and criminality and social deviance? Even though the people who've been running these cities for decades are Democrats who are down with the cause, who are down with the cause of not arresting black criminals, who are down with the cause of incentivizing failure by giving taxpayer dollars to people who are breeding like rabbits, creating children out of wedlock, which statistically leads to more crime and more poverty and more dysfunction. It makes no sense to me. I'll leave off with this. This is a cover of the recent New Yorker magazine. It's two clowns. You have Michael Bennett, a clown, Colin Kaepernick, a clown, with Martin Luther King all kneeling down. This is to make the assumption that this is the new civil rights frontier. But like I said, less than a quarter of police killings are blacks. Most blacks killed by police are justified. I believe that taken into all the homicides committed against blacks a year, about 6,000, less than 1% are committed against unarmed blacks. The problem is not cops. The problem is black criminality, wildly out of proportion. The problem is the fact that we aren't enforcing laws, arresting people and deterring people from committing crimes. We are apologizing for their behavior. The problems are illegitimacy that's rampant in the black community. The problem is a poverty of values. It's not the cops. I've just explained that when you take the cops out, the crime goes up. It's even less safe. The communities are less economically viable. And we're kneeling for this crap. I'm not going to go on and debunk all the lies of Black Lives Matter. That's been done time and time again. You can look that up. Yet that this is being lionized by the leftist press, which is why someone like the Lord Gord will not be renewing his subscription to a magazine like this that apologizes for criminality, that apologizes for social deviance, that apologizes for incompetence, that holds blacks to a lesser standard of civility than whites, and purveys a false narrative that's been debunked time and time again. That's the Lord Gord Podcast. Remember, I'm at the Airliner every Tuesday evening from 9 to midnight. Blues Jam, dollar tacos, free admission. Come out and enjoy some music. Donate on Patreon. Get the Lord Gord album. This isn't TV. Thank you so much. Next week, I'm going to be talking about the mating market. I'm going to be talking about what women want in men, what men want in women, how to make yourself viable on the mating market. I'm going to be talking about it from an evolutionary perspective. I'm going to be bringing a lot of facts and evidence that refute these social constructivist narratives and all this nonsense, this feminist nonsense. We're just going to talk about what women actually want. We're going to talk about the science, the evidence, how to make yourself viable, how to get the job done, how to stop taking rejection personally, how to make better decisions for yourself and your future. All right? I'm Lord Gord. I'll see you next time.